So let's talk through 10 of the strongest Tyranid units in 10th edition 40k. Let's talk through the units that see the most table time in strong army lists. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Tyranids, and in this video I thought we'd talk through 10 of the strongest Tyranids datasheets, ones that get included in a whole bunch of army lists, how they might get fielded, and what makes them strong right now. Tyranids have been doing fairly well in Warhammer 40k recently. Pretty nicely balanced win rates in big tournaments and things, around about the sort of 49-50% sort of mark. A fair few high placings and event wins with them, though maybe not super standout on that metric. And I'd say while some factions had a fair few big changes in the balance update, Tyranids didn't really have too much. A couple of nerfs to a couple of top datasheets, but some good stuff improving as well. And the changes tend to be small nudges as opposed to outright ruining a unit or making one go from bad to great. With that in mind, I thought it could be interesting to take a look at some of the best choices for the Tyranids army in Warhammer 40k right now. So for this one, for one very slightly data-driven way of ranking good units in game, I took a look at 15 Tyranid army lists that had done well in tournaments, either going undefeated or just one loss, and we could talk through them in order of the units that tend to be most commonly included in a wide variety of Tyranid armies. Obviously units will vary a fair bit depending on their detachment. Currently the most played ones tend to be Invasion Fleets with its general purpose damage and defense, and Vanguard Onslaught with its big focus on the Vanguard Invader keywords. There's also some people playing the monster focus Crusher Stampede and the Harvester Healing Assimilation Swarm. Obviously there'll be some units that get played a fair bit more in those compared with elsewhere. Maybe the Vanguard Onslaught being the one that shakes up the datasheets the most, having a really big focus on their keyworded units. There's certainly plenty of those that just get a lot of play regardless though. With all that in mind, let's talk some units though. First up, going through a bunch of things that were just outside of the top 10, being played in a fair few of the army lists but not quite making it into the biggest numbers. First up, we've got the Lictor, which recently went down from 90 points to 80. Tyranids definitely have big competition on their lone operatives, and the others were used a bit more than this guy currently. But even so, 5 of the 15 army lists used Lictors, in particular being favoured by the sneaky shenanigans of the Vanguard Onslaught. It feels like they're extra helpful there with their focus on the whole objective scoring game, and maybe being able to help certain units punch up a little bit with damage against battle shock stuff. In any case, it's a tanky lone operative with 7 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save, not too bad for utility in its own right for 80 points, even if it doesn't have crazy amounts of damage with its 6 attacks at damage 1. It can chew through a few light infantry, but won't be taking down big stuff too fast. They can infiltrate into the mid-board, so it can be screening and disruption units. They have the Synapse keyword, and then provide 2 nice special rules. You can make an enemy unit test battle shock within 12 inches, which means they can be good to hover near the mid-board and stop enemies from denying your objectives. And then on top of that, they also debuff things that are battle shocked, and also within 12 inches, everything gets a +1 to wound against them, and when they make attacks, they're -1 to the hit roll as well. Battle Shock's always a bit swingy as to whether or not it takes effect or not, but they will be nice with Shadow in the Warp, and maybe paired with Tyrants to make that yet more likely to happen. In any case, really quite a nice utility unit, competing with the other lone operatives a bit. Seems likely we'll see a fair amount more of them though, given that they dropped a big 10 points in the balance update. That's a big meaningful 11% drop, and I feel like they're looking a lot stronger against their competitors again now. Speaking of the Tyrant, the big brain bug from Leviathan costs 105 points, and that gets you a tanky 9 wound organism with a 4+ invulnerable save, a psychic flame attack with 2d6 shots at strength 5 and damage 2. Quite punchy at killing enemy space marines and can be alright in Overwatch for that one. There's a fair bit of value to boosting the Shadow in the Warp, where it means that all enemies on the board on the turn where that goes off will be a -1 to test their battle shock, and that can mean a few more will fail. And then it provides Synapse at longer ranges, and it can provide some fairly good damage buffs to leading a unit. Some people choose to run it alongside Zone Thropes. As mentioned, a fair few of the lists chose to pair one with Lictors. It can be nice in Synaptic Nexus lists as well, where it's got a punchy damage enhancement. A lot of lists just have it run solo, as it's not really all that easy to kill with a 4+ invulnerable save for the cost, and it has some fun Overwatch. Though as mentioned, some people choose to use Zone Thropes with it, and it can give them the advantage of the big guns tie never rule, weirdly enough, which means that they can fire in melee, which is quite nice for them as slow ranged infantry. In any case, the Shadow boost, Overwatch, and Synapse things makes it usually quite a good inclusion in virtually any Tyranid list. They're not quite as auto-include as I feel like they were earlier in 10th though. Again, just outside of the top 10 are the Gargoyles, 85 points per 10 of them, so sort of a premium chaff unit there. Moving 12 inches with OC2 gives you a lot of control to throw at objectives. They don't really do too much damage with their flesh borers, but they both have deep strike, meaning that they could drop down and do secondary objectives and things. And they also have their interesting move shoot move rule, which means that they can move extra far, or potentially reach unusual areas of the board, deep striking in, and then using that to get closer. They're generally just quite nice objective utility units. They can do secondaries or swarm a primary objective for a turn or two. They're a bit more common in Vanguard Onslaught, given that they get the relevant keyword for that, and often units tend to take 1 or 2 units of 10 of them, and they do seem to have some good competition from the other Endless Multitudes, particularly the cheaper and pretty much equally fast-moving Hormagaunts. Finally, for the honourable mentions outside of the top 10, we've got the Maliceptor, 170 points worth of big hitting brain bug. They're really quite sturdy on the front line, with 14 wounds at toughness 11 and a 4+ invulnerable save, plus a nice debuff to things nearby with its special rule, and then just has some fairly nice general purpose damage output with its psychic overload shooting and a bit of melee. For lists that choose to take them, they're kind of often taken in multiples, though I feel like they're competing with the Exocrines and Tyrannofexes for the big hitting damage monsters. Given that they've taken a few points increases, I guess it's possible we might see a few more people choose the Maliceptor as a result. Getting into the top 10 proper though, and first up we have the Norn, Emissary and Assimilator. These were taken in 6 out of the 15 army lists I looked at. Basically the Tyranids great big single purpose assassins or single target destroyers. Currently the Emissary is 260 points and the Assimilator is 275, and they both have sturdy stat lines with toughness 11 a 2+ save with a 4+ invulnerable for the Emissary, and both have fairly scary damage output, the Assimilator being a little bit more effective against enemy tanks and monsters. Out of the two, the Emissary still seems to be the most popular though. Going up to strength 10 really helped it quite a bit. It went down in cost in the not too distant past, and they both get that singular purpose rule, which is rather nice for a big feel no pain on one central objective, and also boosting their OC up to 15. It's certainly a big scary stat check for the enemy to put a Norn Emissary on a central objective with a 4+ invulnerable save and 5+ feel no pain, and force them to deal with it, given they're probably not going to be out OCing a 15 OC model. Some people have been still using the Assimilators though, particularly now they actually have the Harvester keyword and can heal themselves in Assimilation Swarm. Again, like the Maliceptor, I wonder if there's some chance that they might gain a little bit versus the Tyrannofexes and Exocrines out there, given that they stayed the same points cost and those two went up. Next up in 8th and 9th we've got a double entry of the Broodlord and Genestealers. In the majority of army lists, if there's one of them there, then there's the other. Genestealers are 75 points per 5, pretty fast and fairly deadly to lighter infantry out there. They can scout 8 inches up the board, move quite quickly after that, and then hit the enemy with a whole bunch of very accurate attacks at AP-2 with some built-in rerolls. They're a fairly nice skirmish unit and maybe one of the slightly scarier threats out there for the Vanguard organisms. It seemed the most common way to field them was a big unit of 10 of them alongside a Broodlord, though some people used smaller amounts or even took some without. They're certainly far more common in Vanguard Onslaught compared with elsewhere though, just given the helpful things that detachment gives you. Then as mentioned, often to lead them is the Broodlord, 80 points to field at the moment, and the big Alpha Genestealer with the twin-linked attacks with devastating wounds, and he can certainly make the unit punch up a fair bit more against sort of medium infantry and scratch vehicles a bit. He gives the entire unit devastating wounds, which means that you're fairly likely to get at least a fair few mortal wounds on anything, just given the sheer amount of Genestealer volume of attacks. Hitting on a 2+, if he can get a full 10 of them to fight, you're probably going to be somewhere around the region of 8 mortal wounds or so. Never mind any other damage that they do. He also has Synapse as well, which can make their strength go up to 5, which makes them a lot more general purpose, so that's one other advantage. In any case, 7 of the lists that I looked at take Genestealers, usually alongside a Broodlord. Next up, and sticking with the Vanguard Invaders, we have Deathleaper, 80 points for the leader Lictor, with a rather fabulous biocape, a 3+ save and stealth. He's the toughest out of the variants, given that he gets a 4+ invulnerable save and a boosted saving throw and 7 wounds. Like normal Lictors, he has fights first and some precision damage that could tear down a few Space Marines, though could potentially go after a character leader on a good roll. And he does help out playing the objective game as well. His Aura of Fear means that enemies have to test Battle Shock in their command phase if they've taken any damage whatsoever, and that does mean that if he is skirmishing on mid-board objectives, there could be a pretty reasonable chance that the opponent might fail a Battle Shock test and lose control of the point as a result. Again, he was taken in 7 out of the 15 army lists, sometimes in Vanguard Onslaught, though plenty of lists just take him elsewhere. Lone operatives are generally handy enough for utility purposes, and he's just got good value on his datasheet alone. Even so though, it looks like he's not the single most popular Tyranid lone operative, as we'll get onto. Next up, we've got some Endless Multitudes with the Hormagaunts. 8 people out of the 15 army list that I took a look at used them in their army. Looks like these guys, being fast-moving, high objective control chaff, are being a worthy rival for the Gargoyles right now. Hormagaunts can move really fast across the board, a big 10-inch move with their OC2, which means that they can jump onto the mid-board objectives from a fair way away. And they can advance and charge as well, meaning that they're quite good at tying up units if it makes sense to. Their damage output isn't exactly spectacular with a bunch of Strength 3 and AP1 attacks, but they should be able to put some damage on some lighter toughness 3 style units, maybe quite good at killing things like Eldari Aspect Warriors or similar. In any case, a fair few lists of various different types chose to take them as the cheap chaff to throw onto objectives, often taking 1 or 2 units of 10 of them. occasionally a few horde style ones going for bigger units. Getting more popular still, and next up we have the Tyrannofex. The big walking Tyranid battle tank was in 10 out of 15 Tyranid army lists, though probably worth noting that as the data comes from before the balance change, these have gone up in points a little bit, but only by 10 points. I say essentially a 5% nerf probably isn't going to stop them from being a very good unit. Either way, and even at the newer higher points cost, the Tyrannofex has absolutely great durability for the points, 16 wounds at toughness 12 with a 2+ save, and a special rule that allows you to reduce one damage characteristic to 0 once per game, which could be quite nice to ward against really big heavy guns that would usually want to target it, maybe things like Tau railguns and the like. The majority of people tend to use this big stompy bug for anti-tank with the Rupture Cannon. Games Workshop made that one get significantly better, 2 shots at strength 18, AP 4 and damage D6+6, a gun that often tends to be really all or nothing, potentially could do things like one-shot knights with a particularly exceptional roll, but a lot of the time might fail to either hit or wound. Otherwise a fair few people still use acid sprays as well, being a bit more of a mid-board skirmish unit that forces the opponent to deal with its durability. That one gets you a big torrent attack with strength 6, AP -2 and damage 2, and can be alright for Overwatch. Seemed like there was a good variety of people running anywhere between 1 and 3 of these, and it could be a nice target to pair with Hive Tyrants for some free stratagems, maybe things like the 5+ feel no pain in Invasion Fleet, or even having command point rerolls being quite a good target for the Rupture Cannon. Otherwise, also ranking rather highly are the Exocrines, 140 points for perhaps the most general purpose reliable Tyranid gun turret bug, and again a very small balance update going up 5 points, but again I wouldn't really say that the 4% points change is particularly meaningful and won't stop it being good. For their cost they're fairly sturdy, 14 wounds at toughness 10 with a 3+ save, a couple more wounds than say equivalents like Predator tanks or Gladiator tanks, and then they attack with the Bioplasmic Cannon, D6+3 shots at strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3, a profile that's particularly good against elite infantry, but also has enough AP and damage to threaten tougher stuff as well, and I'll particularly like either Invasion Fleet for the lethal hits against tanks and monsters, or getting lethal hits from a Hive Tyrant. After they've shot something, they also mark that unit to get reroll hit rolls of 1 against it in the shooting phase, and that could be pretty nice if they're working in a battery with other ones, where some of them could get the advantages of that if they double down on the same firepower. In any case, at least before the balance update, they seem to be near auto-include, basically 80% of army lists at least taking some of them, and more commonly in 2s or 3s than just 1s. They're just fairly straightforward and easy to use, good damage output for the Tyranids, and I feel like the balance change isn't going to be enough to change that in any big way. Otherwise, for Tyranid near auto-includes, we have the Lictor. Looks like out of the 4 lone operatives available, this guy's reigning supreme at the moment, again looking in borderline auto-include territory, and appearing in 12 out of the 15 army lists that I looked at. Cheap lone operatives are just generally handy to have in 40k for area denial and board control type things. 60 points is quite good, and they're not a complete pushover to take out with 6 wounds at toughness 6, even if they don't get an invulnerable save. For 60 points they fight at least fairly hard, with the same profile as Deathleaper, fights first, and a bunch of strength 7 and damage 2 attacks with precision. And if they want to, they can also basically near guarantee that they get the jump on an enemy unit when it makes sense to, getting a free rapid ingress, which means that you could have it turn up just outside of 12 inches of the enemy, so it can't be shot but then gets a near automatic charge in the next turn after it moves. Overall, they're just great little utility units to have around, really cheap and really effective. The vast majority of competitive lists take at least 1, and plenty take more than 1, maybe the Vanguard Onslaught ones being particularly likely to go heavy. Next up and in second place, we've got a sort of combined offering for the Hive Tyrants. Again, looking like basically the vast majority of Tyranid army lists want to take a Hive Tyrant, and the choice is then whether or not to go for the winged one or the on-foot one, but not both of them together, as a whole load of their value is from that Will of the Hive Mind special rule with the free stratagems, and you can only make use of 1 copy of that at a time. The divide between the 2 of them was fairly even. Certainly the winged Hive Tyrant tends to crop up more in Vanguard lists, as you'd expect, but it seems that both datasheets do have some draw to them, and I guess maybe the on-foot one might have gained slightly from the balance pass by getting a small points cut of 10 points cheaper. Then you have a Tyranid monster with 10 wounds, a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save. Not really the biggest defensive profile, but not trivial to take out, most of them often taking the Bone Sword for a bunch of strength 9 and damage 3 attacks, the on-foot one most commonly taking the Venom Cannon to back it up. I feel like their real value is in their buffing rules though, in particular that Will of the Hive Mind rule, which I feel like makes up quite a good part of their points value. You get to decrease the cost of 1 stratagem by 1 command point for any unit within 12 inches, both in your turn and the opponent's turn. And that's just pretty enormous value to have parked in the centre of an army. You'll get access to so many more stratagems like that, and that means they can make a big difference to the game, even if they're just kind of staying hidden behind a ruin or something for the first few turns. Otherwise, the on-foot one gives you the assault keyword and lethal hit, which can be pretty nice to pair with any of the gun bugs. Maybe Exocrines in particular really like that combo. and then they can be a good choice for enhancements, anything that makes them tankier and harder to kill. The Vanguard Onslaught has some fun ones for the winged Hive Tyrants. Typically people don't tend to use Tyrant Guard with them, even despite them being so cheap for their toughness, preferring instead to keep the Hive Tyrants hidden out of line of sight until they need to expose them to deal damage later in the game. In any case, for the majority of Tyranid army lists, then you generally want one of these. It's more the decision as to which one best fits the build that you're going for. Then finally, and ranking in first, as the single most played Tyranid unit in competitive lists right now is the trusty Biovore. Exactly one of these things having been a staple since the earliest days of 10th edition. After the changes to secondaries, they're still really effective. 50 points as a little artillery bug parked in the backboard, where that's not too bad a price for a unit that can just take up a bit of space, screen some deep strike, and maybe be in the position to do primary or secondary objectives. Their real value comes from spawning the spore mines though for board control. Each turn you can only have one unit spawn mines, but basically lets you deep strike a new unit of spore mines onto the board. If you go first, it could be kind of big for, say, stopping an opponent advancing onto a mid-board objective, and that could directly cost them victory points there. And it also means that you could fire them into position to do things like deep strike screen the opponent, maybe even move block if there's a narrow movement lane, or auto-complete certain secondary objectives that need a unit to be somewhere in the board. Even at OC0 they can still do some things like engage on all fronts, for example. Being able to have a random pop-up token unit is just kind of handy, and every so often they might even do a mortal wound if the opponent has to move close to them. Between all that, for optimised lists, it just doesn't really make sense not to have a Biovore in there. In an absolute pinch as well, if a single damage to attack could have some sort of massive value finishing off an enemy unit, then you do also have the option to use their indirect fire normally. That just about brings us to the end of a top 10 of strong Tyranid units right now though. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which of these have been making their way into your list or not, and would you rate any other units as deserving a place on the list? Look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. I'm sure there'll be more for the Tyranids in the future. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.